But if you look at the layers, they're all the same. Not only are they all the same, they are pancake flat. There's no evidence of millions of years of time and erosion in between the laying down of those layers. And that is probably the best evidence, if you're looking with your eyes open, that there was a global flood. The other thing that you can look at is coal. All right, we've got coal all over the world. There are coal seams everywhere. And in the United States, there are 3 major coal seams with a difference of, I think the earliest one is about 325 million years old, and you got one that's about 250 million years old, and you got another one that's about 180 million years old. These are big coal seams. I mean, we're talking mineable quantities of coal. Think about the Decker mine out in western Montana. That's where DTE gets a lot of their coal from, all right? And I mean, they've been digging for a long time, and they're still getting huge amounts of coal out of that place. And what you look at when you see coal is a lot of things like bark and wood and things like this. And I mean, massive amounts of it. You don't see, and you know, their story on how coal formed is kind of, well, they grew in this swamp and all this sort of thing, but you don't see swamp type stuff. You don't see roots. You don't see soil in between mixed in with all this stuff. What you see is this massive 300-400 foot thick layer of things that's mostly tree bark and stuff like that, in between a layer of clay and another layer of clay, and it's all mashed down and carbonized. Okay, that's what you see. But that's not how the story is on how coal forms, but that's one of the best. Now the thing that's the best about that is these are millions and millions of years old according to secular geology. They still have carbon-14 in them. And the carbon-14 in all of those 3 layers says they're all about the same age. Oh, you know, you got carbon-14 in 300 million year old coal. After about 100,000 years, there should be no carbon-14 at all, okay? And here you got millions and millions of years, and carbon-14 is still there, which means one of 2 things. Either it's carbon-14 has a longer half-life than everybody thought, and it's fairly well measured at about 5,400 years half-life. All right, so you go about 6 half-lives, 100,000 years, there should be 0 carbon-14 left. Because basically a half-life is you got X amount to start with, and after 1 half-life you got half amount, and after the next half-life you got a quarter, then you got an eighth, and it keeps on going down, and after about 6 half-lives you got to a point where there's virtually nothing left, okay? So, and it's still there. So I mean, when you start looking at stuff like this, it's like, you know, how can you say that? But don't bother me with the facts, my mind is made up. Okay, and that's basically where you're at with this, especially the geology. Beloved, I now write you this second epistle, in both of which I stir up your pure minds by way of reminder that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before the holy prophets, of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Even the scoffers believe in creation. For this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire unto the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. So there you got two major catastrophes talked about. The first one was water. The second one is fire. First one's already happened. Second one is coming. That could be really, really bad. If your bags aren't packed when the fire comes, it's going to be bad. I mean, for the people whose bags weren't packed when the water came, there were only 8 people that were saved from that. So what are the scoffers saying with their comments? Where's the promise of his coming? Verse 4. Nothing has changed since the beginning of creation, also verse 4. But they're still talking about that there was a creation. They believed about that, all right? That's a thing that's kind of changed with, if you will, our advanced science. We're much smarter than that now. And it was a denial of history and a denial of God's sovereignty. That's what the scoffers were saying when they said, where's the promise? All right? What three events in history are overlooked by the scoffers? First one is creation. Even though they said since the beginning of creation, all things have been continuing. The global flood and the coming of Christ Jesus. Those are all things that the scoffers are saying then and today. You know, they talk about creation. They deny that entirely. They talk about nothing came from everything. All right, from out of nothing we got everything, the Big Bang. First there was nothing. There was a singularity, and there was nothing there, and suddenly we got everything that we see. You know, it took a couple of billion years for that to happen, but you got nothing, and then you got the universe starting. It's just amazing. The global flood, we're going to talk about that today, and the coming of Jesus Christ, we're going to talk about that probably in the next week or so. Ever been driving and seen these things? You know, you don't see it much in Michigan because typically we're at 500 foot above sea level right now, and the maximum elevation above sea level is about 3,000 feet up in the UP. All right? We don't go through hills, we go around them and over them in Michigan. All right? But if you drive to other places like Pennsylvania or you drive out west, you'll see these. These are called road cuts. All right? Instead of building a road all the way up over the top of the mountain, they moved the mountain and put the road through it. Okay? And what you see are layers. You see this stuff here. Now this is from blasting. All right? But if you look at the stuff on the other side of that, you'll see layers and layers of rock. And those are sedimentary rocks. Those are rocks that were laid down under moving water. That's what sedimentary is. Sedimentary rock is a layer of something that was laid down under moving water and over a period of time solidified into rock. All right, it could be sandstone, could be shale, could be conglomerate, could be all kinds of stuff. Limestone, all of these things turn to rock eventually. Then if there's other things, it'll metamorphose them. It'll turn them into something else. For example, if you get a lot of heat on sandstone, it turns to quartz. If you get a lot of heat on limestone, it turns to marble. If you get a lot of heat on shale, it turns to slate. Okay? And so those are rocks that were at one time mud, lime, and sand got turned into something else. All right? But what you see when you look at these things are layer after layer after layer. And that's all sedimentary rock. You know, this is a constant reminder of the flood because these layers are huge. I mean, when we get out to, when we get to the southwest and we start talking about the Grand Staircase, there's 12,000 feet of sediment between the bottom of Grand Canyon and the top of Bryce Canyon. 12,000 feet of sediment, all right, that was laid down and then eroded off. That's a lot of dirt. I mean, if you see a local flood today, you don't see anything of this level. And the thing that you really look at when you start looking at these things is you see one layer and another layer and another layer and another layer, and there's virtually no evidence of any time eclipsing happening in between those. You got one layer, another layer right down on top of it with another layer on top of that. And that supposedly represents millions and millions of years. Where's the erosion? Where's the life? Where's the geologic? Where's the biology? All of that stuff that should be part of that. It's not there. In the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On that very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, and every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah 2 by 2, all of flesh, in which was the breath of life. That's called nephesh. Okay? We're going to talk about that. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded them, and the Lord shut him in. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up on the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth. And the ark moved about on the surface of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole of heaven were covered. And the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and all the mountains were covered, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All of those in whose was the breath of life, the spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. That's pretty sobering when you think about that. Only 8 people survived that. And they did it because God told them to prepare for it. So Noah built an ark. God sent him the creatures that were to be saved. And we looked at that last week a little bit when we were talking about the uniqueness of man. There was a huge bottleneck about 4,500 years ago. And if you do the genetics, it traced back to 3 women using mitochondrial DNA. There's this big genetic bottleneck. And they found the same thing in the animals, that there's a genetic bottleneck where all of a sudden all of this diversity goes back to 1 or 2 creatures. It's simply incredible. And they just look at that and go, gee, wonder what happened there. So, what can we glean from Genesis 7? All things that I have made I'm going to destroy, verse 4. The fountains of the great deep were broken, the windows of heaven were open, in verse 11. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, in verse 12. All the high hills under the whole heaven were covered, verse 19. The mountains were covered to 15 cubits, verse 20. Now, if you use a 18-inch cubit, that's a lot of water above them. So what would the aftermath of such a catastrophe look like? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. That sounds like a song. That's a song that, I can't think of the guy's name now. Anyway, that was his thing. Was billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. So that was his song. The fossils show a progression of sudden violent burial from the seafloor to the highest land position. Marine and terrestrial fossils are all mixed up. They found marine fossils at the top of Mount Everest, 29,000 feet above sea level now, okay? Marine fossils. You know, those things used to be down on the ground somewhere before the mountains were formed. And the fossils, the incredible detail in the fossils. They've got fossilized jellyfish. Yes. Think about that. You know, there's nothing solid in a jellyfish, and yet they've got a fossil impression of them. Sedimentary rocks are everywhere. You don't find basement-type, granite-type rocks without a whole bunch of sediment on top of them. You've got to dig a long way to find them, unless you're looking at mountains. And even those have a lot of sediment. Rock layers are continental in scope. I mean, you don't see anything like that happening today. When you see a local flood, you see mud, you may get 2 or 3 feet of mud or something like that, and then it goes away, and then people dig the mud out and they go back to their lives. All right? You don't see anything like what you see at the Grand Canyon. I mean, 5,000 feet of sediment laid down one right after the next. You don't see the fossils. Well, Nautiloid Canyon's a good one. This thing covers several hundred square miles. It's a red wall limestone. And you see a turbulent layer, a kind of a quiescent layer in the middle where things are kind of static, and then another turbulent layer on the top, indicating it was all laid down under one time. But what you see in there, like the nautiloids are like, you see a spiral nautiloid that you see today. It's kind of curled up, and it's got all these fancy rings and stuff on it, while a regular nautiloid was straight. So you got this big, long tube shape with the same kind of cephalopod creature in it, And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them buried in this rock layer, all facing northeast. So they were facing into a current that was coming at them. 200 square miles, current coming at them from one direction, just completely buried. Very few of them are tumbled around, some of them are up and down and things, but almost all of them are facing northeast because there was something coming at them, and they were facing into the flood. The same thing if you're in a ship at sea and you got a storm coming at you, you put the bow into the waves because you don't want to get sideways. The waves will flip you right over. Think of the Titanic. Or not Titanic. What was that? The Poseidon Adventure. There you go. Think of that. They got broached by a wave that hit them, and it flipped the boat over. So in a big storm, you put the bow into the storm that's coming at you, into the wind, to break the waves so that they don't break you. Okay, so here's all these nautiloids facing into a flow coming at them from the northeast and got totally buried. You look at some of these, I mean, just look at the detail of these. It just, I mean, here's a spider. You know, here's a spiral nautilus, ichthyosaur, and our good old buddy Tyrannosaurus rex, okay? But look at the detail in which they're preserved. I mean, just, it's stunning. You don't see that today. If somebody dies by the side of the road, pretty soon you see a flock of crows or ravens or something like that. The next thing you see, there's hardly anything left. And then if there are other big scavengers, the bones disappear, and pretty soon you got nothing. The only way to make a fossil is to bury it suddenly, completely, and then cover it so that it doesn't have a chance to decay. So, and I mean, when you look at some of these things, here's a fish eating a pterosaur. Pterosaur got too close to the surface of the water. This guy was having them for lunch, and he got buried. Here's another guy having lunch, got buried. You know, if you kill a fish, it floats, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it's pretty much scavenged away. There's not much left. Now, this is the first layer of the flood. It's called the Tapete Sandstone. This sandstone layer covers almost all of North America and the United States and up into the Upper Peninsula. If you want to see the Tapete Sandstone from the Grand Canyon, go to Pictured Rocks. That's that same layer. Okay? Down there, you're about 500 feet elevation. Up at Pictured Rocks, you're about 505 feet elevation. It's the same layer. And that layer continues on into Europe and Africa and the Middle East. They did the analysis of that layer, and where that sand came from was over here, the Appalachians. How are you going to get the dirt, if you will, the sandstone from the Appalachian Mountains out to the southwest? You know, that's a long way to go. You ever driven there? Driven out to Arizona? You know, that's a 3 or 4 day trip. If you don't do it all at once. You do it all at once, you're going to be one tired puppy. But how are you going to get the sand from the Appalachian Mountains out to the southwest and then spread it all over the rest of the world if there wasn't some massive catastrophe that happened? And that's just the first layer. There you go. Whoop. Go the right way. This is why we need someone to help us, because this thing is trigger happy. All right, there's the Tapete Sandstone right there at Pictured Rocks, northern Michigan. I did a winter scene because it's winter. But here's a geologic column with all of the various ages and stuff talked about. Right here, the Pennsylvanian and the Mississippian, that's where most of the coal is. That's called the Carboniferous. Okay, that's where most of the coal seams are. Those are standard geologic things. This here are episodes or mega sequences that were proposed by creation geologists, which use basically what you're looking at here is the flood. What they're looking at is somewhere around 550 million years ago up to today. Okay, so you're looking at, according to them, 550 million years of time. Here, about a year. So here's day 1 of the flood. There's day 40 of the flood after 40 days of rain. There's the peak of the flood, and there's what they talk about as the upper boundary, which is before we get to, around here, this is where we are, where we come in afterwards, after the flood. This is post-flood time after this. And here's like what the sea level was doing. Here's where present sea level is. Here's where peak sea level was. You can see where everything was pretty much totally underwater. And so here's a cut through. There's the Tapete sandstone right here. You got Bright Angel Moab, and here is the red wall limestone. That's where all the nautiloids are, is in that formation. This is 900 feet thick. That's a lot of limestone. There's the basement rocks. These are the creation rocks down here. There's the pre-flood sediments. And then you got the Sauk, the Tippecanoe, the Cascadia, the Absaroka. That's pretty much all of the flood sediments that were laid down. Now, you've seen this one once before. This is the Grand Staircase. You got the Grand Canyon down in here. So you got the same set. The Sauk is down here. Tippecanoe's there. Cascadia's in the middle. Absaroka. Now, you're up at the top of the Grand Canyon. You got the Zuni and the Tejas. The Zuni is out here. This is Zion Canyon here, the White Cliffs. And then you got Bryce Canyon way up here at the top. That's 12,000 feet of sediment. That's a lot of dirt being moved around. So there's 5,000 feet, and there's another 10,000 feet. That's a lot of stuff being moved around. I mean, it basically completely resurfaced the entire Earth. So here's another step. You can see the Grand Canyon, Zion Canyon, and Bryce Canyon. And you can see where the layers sometimes undulate some, but for the most part, they're pretty much pancake flat, and when you look at these layers, you couldn't put a piece of paper in there. They're just laid down, and there's no evidence of any time elapsing between the first, one layer laid down and the next one laid right on top of it. So that gets you out of the Grand Canyon. Then you got Zuni. That's where a lot of this stuff happened. And then Tejas was at the end when things were starting to run off. That's where in this area is where all the erosion took place, as the waters were running off the Earth. So why water? It's the best choice to destroy all living ecosystems. It wipes out all life while only transforming but not totally destroying the material of the Earth. What it did is it ripped it all off and redeposited it. So you got different stuff. In the midst of a cataclysmic judgment, God shows his mercy. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. God designs an ark, a place of safety for man and the animals. The ultimate marine architect. Dimensions are perfect for stability in rough weather. It's 1 to 6 in terms of length, and 1 to 10 in terms of height. So you got 1 to 6, 6 times longer than it is wide, and it's 1/10 as tall as it is long. All right? And marine architects had to learn those lessons by trial and error, by building boats that were okay in rough weather and boats that sank or flipped over in calm weather. So that's what they learned. They learned something that God already told Noah a long time ago. Build it 6 times as long as it is wide and 1/10 as tall as it is long. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. We looked outside one time and we did a Sunday school lesson a while back. And if you look out here at those big poles, that's about 45 feet. All right, and then if you look down the street to the first stop sign, that's around 500 feet. And if you look about 2/3 across the south parking lot, that's 75 feet. All right, so that'll give you an idea of the dimensions of that. Now, if you haven't been down to the ark, cubit between 18 and 21 inches, it would look something like this. They use the 21-inch cubit to build that. It's the largest wood structure in the world. But that'll give you an idea of just how massive the ark was. If you've been there and you walk in, it's like, whoa. You know, I mean, you start looking at the wood these guys were using, it's just absolutely incredible. So if you look at the dimensions in cubits, with an 18-inch cubit, you got 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. With a 21-inch cubit, it's 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high. That's what the Ark Encounter uses, is that they were using the 21-inch cubit. And that boat is just staggeringly huge. I mean, you come up out of the valley and you see this thing the first time, it's like people seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. You hear this, whoa, you know, when they first see it. It's just absolutely massive. So the volume's equal to about 300 rail cars. You ever been sitting when a unit train comes by? It's 100 cars. It takes a while. That's only 1/3 of the volume. 3 decks for living, food storage, and animal pens. Only about 2,000 kinds of animals were needed to replenish the earth after the flood. Genetic diversity was built into these animals to start with. And while not specified in Scripture, it's likely that plans for containment, feeding, and waste removal were also provided. The Ark has some ideas on how that sort of thing could have happened. And you would have needed it because you only got like 8 people trying to feed, I figure, probably about 6,000 critters. So the flood was massive. It was just absolutely staggeringly huge. And it's all around us. And it's hard to believe that people can't look at that and see what God did and to see the judgment. But it's basically, don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up. And that's exactly what Romans said was going to happen. If people decide that they don't want God in their lives, he's going to blind them and they can't see it even when it's staring them in the face. And that's sad. Because the evidence is quite obvious if you look. Now, man says the age of dinosaurs was from 140 to 600 million years ago, long before man evolved. If there was really a worldwide flood, dinosaurs would not be part of the land animals on the ark. And that big word there is if there was a worldwide flood, which they deny. But a lot of them are coming around to looking at, you know, how do fossils form? They said there must have been some big catastrophe because we don't see any of that happening today. Even with the local catastrophes that we have all around us, you don't see fossils forming. Animals described in Genesis 6 and 7 were animals that we are familiar with. Fantastic creatures and beasts were not described. That's an old earth creationist position. All right? They say that basically the critters that were brought to the ark were things that we're all familiar with because that's what we see today. So there were no dinosaurs on the ark. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort to the ark. Keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind. And every creeping thing on the earth after its kind, 2 of every kind will come in. Keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself all the food that is eaten, and shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. We're looking at different kinds of dinosaurs. All right? We're looking at ankylosaurs, armored dinosaurs. We're looking at theropods. And you can look and you see there's a guy in there to give you an idea of some of the size. These are hadrosaurs. These are basically plant eaters. And then you got winged ones, all kinds of different winged reptiles. But the design is pretty much the same. So logistics. Of the 668 named species of dinosaurs, only 50 or 60 would have been needed to be sent on the ark. The average dinosaur size would be about the size of a bison, about a buffalo, okay? Juveniles or smaller of each kind would probably be the likely choice for a year-long voyage. You don't need a 100-foot-long dinosaur if they're not going to last very long, so you'd take a juvenile, a smaller one that would fit. Even the largest dinosaur hatched from an egg not much bigger than a football. So if you think about that, they started out in an egg about this big, and the biggest ones got to be over 100 feet long, all right? But you didn't need a 100-foot-long dinosaur. What you needed was a guy probably about weeks or 2 out of the egg. able to handle themselves, don't have to be very big, don't eat that much. So assuming about 120 animals on the average size of a bison, say 2,200 pounds, that's pretty big. I mean, if you've ever seen one of them up close, they're pretty good size. They would easily fit into 17 standard semi-trailers that are 50 foot by 8.5 by 8.5. So they'd fit pretty easily in there. The Ark, using the Royal Cubit 500, 10, 85, and 51, would accommodate about 450 semi-trailers. So they got lots and lots of rooms for all of the animals, the food, and the people. There's lots and lots of room. Creation scientists have calculated that dinosaurs were among the 16,000 creatures brought on by Noah to be saved. All of the creatures would take up less than half the space on the ark. The rest of it was food and place for the people. The bulk of the remaining space would be designated for food. While not specified, it's likely that the ark also had means to feed water and dispose of the waste. You know, you got a lot of creatures you got to take care of. You're going to have to do a lot of labor-saving things. So you could have water troughs, feed troughs, slatted in the floor for the waste to get collected down to some place and then removed. So why aren't they mentioned in the Bible? They are. They're just not called dinosaurs. Dinosaur, terrible lizard, was coined in 1841 by Sir Richard Owen. The Bible uses other words. Dragon, these are the places where it is. Behemoth in Job 40, Leviathan in Job 41, and Isaiah 27. Those are the words that the Bible uses for dinosaur-type creatures. The word for dragon is tanin, means it's used 21 times for dragon, 3 times for a serpent, whale 3 times, and a sea monster once. Drakon, that's the Greek word, it's a fabulous kind of serpent. Then you got behemoth, a large quadruped, or luretwan, a serpent, especially a crocodile or some other large type sea monster. Those are the words that you would see if you were looking in the Bible using the original translations. All right? So you got dragon, was used in the New Testament as well as the Old, and then the Hebrew for the other 2 words. All right? So it's apparent that they saw something. The time frame from the writing of the Bible is around 200 BC to 90 AD. All right? So in that time frame, they were talking about these creatures. Whoop. I say this is why we need some help. All right, so Herodotus and Josephus documented flying reptiles in Egypt and Arabia. Dragon accounts from China, Europe, the Middle East, ancient Latin America share similar accounts of dragons and other beasts. Marco Polo documented numerous dragons in China while he was there in the 1300s. Large flying reptiles in Mexico and the southwest USA, thunderbirds, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico. These are, flying dragons, if you will. Dinosaur-like creatures are featured on Babylonian landmarks, Roman mosaics, Asian pottery, royal robes, Eastern burial shrouds, government seals, Peruvian burial stones and tapestries, Mayan sculptures, Aboriginal and Native American petroglyphs, those are carved rock drawings, and many other pieces of ceremonial art throughout ancient cultures. Think about this. The dinosaurs died out 65, 66 million years ago before man showed up. So where do they get all these ideas? Think about that. That's in Cambodia. Looks a lot like a stegosaurus. This is a Dayak culture in Borneo. Looks like a carved pterosaur. This is Jalisco culture in Mexico. Looks like an ankylosaur, some sort of a armored dinosaur. And then you got this petroglyph in the southwest United States. Looks a lot like a hadrosaur. Where did they get those ideas from? If there were no dinosaur pictures around at the time when these were done. That's not it. That's just, there's more. This is a carved drawing, or carved wood drawing from Africa. This is a Persian wall in what used to be called Persepolis, the capital of Persia. This is a Greek urn with what looks like some sort of a sea creature that you don't see, it doesn't look like a regular fish. You got and sort of an abstract version in Peru. And then you got another petroglyph. Looks a lot like a sauropod from Arizona. You can see that down in the Grand Canyon. So, and then there are other things. You got a sort of a triceratops sort of thing with someone riding on it. Whoop. Let's get back. And get the right button here. This looks like somebody riding on a triceratops. You know, 800 BC? Where'd they get that idea from? And they, you know, these have been found in graves and other places where they've done archaeology that they know how old they are, and these are not something that somebody conjured up to sell. You know, these things are in museums. So you got lots and lots of evidence of people that have seen these things ahead of time. How about some hard evidence? Documented human tracks in ancient strata in the same strata as dinosaur tracks in Laetoli, Tanzania, Glen Rose, Texas. Here's the Laetoli trackway. If you look at this, it was three different individuals walking in soft volcanic mud, if you will. They're made of volcanic ash that then hardened. The ash has been dated about 3.7 million years old, and the tracks look unquestionably human. They got arches in the feet, they got toes that kind of line up with the front. They don't have anything that looks like an ape or anything like that. And these are the reasons that Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, was given human feet and hands, because of these tracks. They said, it's got to be something, it can't be human because it's too old for us. All right, so here's a picture. This is what they actually found. This is the actual Lucy skeleton, okay? You don't see but maybe one finger bone, no feet, hardly any limbs. And so this is what they came up with, using a lot of imagination. Look at the hands. You know, they got regular human hands, even though they know that the finger bones were curved for like hanging on trees. The fossil was dated to about 3.5 million years ago, and the human hands and feet were added so she could be made to handle a Laetoli trackway. So this is what they did. Look at that. 7B. That's what they put on the foot of that. Now here's an even better one. This was you see that? There's about a 8C and a tridactyl dinosaur, theropod, where the theropod stepped on the human footprint. But once again, that's too old, so they don't, you know, the human footprint's the same medium-sized theropod dinosaur. Secular paleontologists decried this as a fake and a carving. So they did a spiral CT scan. And what they look is, you can't fake this if you're putting a pressure down on like mud. You're going to create pressure down on it. You can't fake that with a carving. And that's what they found when they did the CT scan. And the same thing with the dino toe. So this falsified the whole idea of carving. In secular, they state that the footprint was from an as yet undiscovered dinosaur. So that's their story now, because it can't be a fake. So, okay, it's not fake. Well, it's got to be some other dinosaur we don't know about yet, with you know, size 8 feet. So our conclusion is dinosaur and man were created on day 6. Representatives of a number of dinosaur kinds did get on the ark. The dinosaurs left the ark along with other animals. It's evident that dinosaurs did not thrive after the flood, but persisted into the Middle Ages. That's where you get the St. George and the dragon killers and all these sorts of things. Extensive records, artifacts, legends worldwide give witness to these facts that men have seen dinosaurs well before the first fossils were dug up. Where did they get the ideas for these things if they didn't, if somebody didn't see them and then make a carving or a picture or something like that of them? So were dinosaurs on the ark? Absolutely. We're done. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm not sure which one I'm doing first. I'm working on judgment and that sort of thing, but I think I'm going to save that for the end, and we're going to probably look at radiometric dating and maybe some ancient starlight stuff. All right? These are all things that you need. If you believe in creation, these are things where people are going to be, if you tell them that you're a creationist, they say, well, what about this? What about that? Okay? And one of the things they talk about is ancient starlight. You know, how come if we're only 6,000 years